This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 529. Why you should never assume when selling.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Now, I'm assuming you've decided to listen to this episode to grow your sales skills. And I'm also assuming it's based on my babbling and some musings that I've had on an ancient Chinese philosopher. But I shouldn't make that assumption, should I? You've probably heard that the problem with assuming is it makes an assumption that a sentence is going to end one way and instead ends another way. Well, the same is true when you assume you know what prospects want before allowing them to actually tell you, which is, by the way, a big no-no. Our sage Lao Tzu has much to say about this, why we should never assume when selling. And that's the topic for today. But before we get to the chapter and the story, make sure and subscribe to the podcast. That way you never miss an episode. And also make sure to listen all the way to the end because we're adding a new segment to the podcast called Good News. And it's about all the good news that's going on with all the listeners and sharing it here with the community. There'll be details and all about that at the end. Make sure and listen all the way to the end. And now, with no further ado, let's get to it. The master seller makes no assumptions, letting prospects voice their wants and needs. Neither do they argue. Those who argue are not good. Rehearsed sellers aren't always the best. Not all unrehearsed sellers are bad. The master seller does not hoard. The more they help others, the more they benefit themselves. And the more they give to others, the more they get for themselves. The master seller always works with their prospects, setting aside assumptions to focus on what's best for them. And now today's story. Chris and Pat joined a new prospect at the table. Chris took the lead in the conversation with Lee, and Pat had heard some grumblings about Chris being pushy and assuming with prospects. Pat wanted to get an unfiltered first-hand view. Now, toward the beginning, Lee shared a challenge the businesses faced. Chris stopped the conversation to share solutions and products that were certain to solve Lee's problems. But Pat was skeptical. Lee, too. "Hey, let's slow down," said Pat. "I have a few questions for Lee." The interruption caught Chris off guard. Pat asked Lee more questions, and after an hour, it was pretty clear what Lee needed. Pat and Chris couldn't provide a solution, so they all shook hands and parted goodbye. After the call, Chris was angry. "Why did you interrupt me? I think we could have closed Lee." "True," said Pat, "but that's not what Lee needs. Lee needs a solution we don't have. Now, we've been thinking about adding it, but as of now, we don't have it. It would have been unethical to sell Lee something that doesn't help their organization. We should never presume we know what's best for our clients. It's for them to tell us what they need. We are only guides with a narrow set of answers." Not assuming a prospect's desire is a strength, but knowing what's good for them, that's a weakness. So too is the act of taking for granted and presuming, because that instills weakness. Great sellers know the cure is to find solutions that match the prospect's needs. Great sellers know prospects are unique like snowflakes, each with struggles and frustrations that are unique to them. Assuming all prospects are alike is dangerous territory. Lao Tzu wrote, quote, "True words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not true. Those who are good do not argue. Those who argue are not good. Those who know are not learned. The learned do not know. The sage does not hoard. The more they help others, the more they benefit themselves. Stop assuming you know what's best for your customers until you have an open conversation with them. It's not until they share will you know how to help. The more you help, the more you will help yourself. It's a paradox. I know, but it's also true. As I mentioned at the top of the show, not only do I do sales consulting, but I also have a podcast agency, Habanero Media. And recently, one of the clients started a new program on their podcast, something they call the Good News. And it's where listeners share and highlight some good news that they've had this week. And good news can be anything. It could be a successful initiative, a deal won, a fantastic review online, maybe a shout out to a work colleague. Well, their good news got me thinking about sales babble. And wouldn't it be awesome if we were to do something of that nature here on the podcast? Because salespeople got a tough job. Most people don't want to do it, right? Most people would rather go to the dentist and have oral surgery than enter sales. Because a lot of people just don't have that tenacity and the patience for cold outreach. Of course, I believe anybody can become proficient at selling. That's the whole point of sales babble. But a lot of people don't have that desire to qualify prospects, get appointments, share a sales presentation, ask for their business, close a deal. Each one of these is a victory to advance to the next stage. And when a prospect converts to a customer or a client, hey, that's cause for celebration. Which is why I'd like to start Good News on Sales Babble. So when you get a new job, or you move jobs, or you persuade a reluctant buyer, or you advance your career, all of these events are important. And they can be an inspiration to others who are grinding just like you. Like it could be something personal that's happened to you. Maybe you just earned a degree or some kind of certification to help advance your career. Something along those lines, an achievement that warrants a high five. Send me your good news, and you can share your name, and I'll highlight your company. Or you could be completely anonymous. I don't need to know the details about you or maybe the deal that you were working on. It's not about that. It's about the knowledge that you had a win that must be recognized. Now, at the beginning of the year, I was musing about all the bad news. And there's a lot of bad news this year. And I've really set news aside this year. I just can't listen to it because it just makes me depressed. And I was thinking, how can we talk about all the good things that are happening in the world? Because there are a lot of good things happening in the world. I bump into it all the time. I talk to people and ask them how things are going, and they tell me good stuff. I want to highlight those things here on this podcast. If it wasn't for you guys, I couldn't do this show. You're the reason I stepped up to the mic each week. I know that you guys got challenges in your profession, and I can help. The whole point of Sales Babble is to provide some selling secrets, right? By sharing good news, we all get to celebrate. So how do we do this? Well, it's easy peasy. Go to salesbabble.com, and at the top there's a button for good news. Or you can click on the Babble Me button, which has been on the website since the day one. Or you can message me on LinkedIn. Any of these, you can send me an email. Whatever's easier. Share your success or ask a question. I want to hear from you. With that said, that's all I've got for today. Until next Tuesday, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.